The scream tore through the Venice Hotel's marble lobby at 3 a.m., shattering the silence that had settled over the ancient city like fog over the canals. Marcus Chen dropped his suitcase and ran toward the sound, his investigative journalist instincts overriding the jet lag that had been pulling at his bones. He rounded the corner to find a man in an expensive suit standing over a body, blood pooling beneath the marble cherub fountain, and when their eyes met, Marcus knew two things instantly. This man was the most beautiful person he'd ever seen, and he was holding a knife. "I didn't kill him," the man said in accented English, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. His dark eyes were wide, not with guilt but with something Marcus recognized from years of chasing Stories' pure, unadulterated fear. Marcus should have called the police immediately. Should have stepped back, should have done anything except what he did, which was move closer and say, "Then we need to get you out of here before someone thinks you did." The man stared at him for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, searching Marcus's face for something truth perhaps, or trustworthiness, or maybe just the same reckless stupidity that made Marcus run toward danger instead of away from it. "I'm Luca Moretti," he said, dropping the knife with a clatter that seemed obscenely loud in the sudden silence. Marcus grabbed his wrist, feeling the rapid pulse beneath warm skin, and pulled him toward the service stairs as voices began to rise from the upper floors. They ran through the labyrinth of Venice's back alleys, their footsteps echoing off ancient stone, the first light of dawn beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Luca moved with the confidence of someone who knew these streets intimately, ducking through archways and across small bridges that Marcus would never have noticed in the shadows. When they finally stopped in a tiny courtyard garden, hidden behind a crumbling palazzo, both were breathing hard, and Marcus realized he was still holding Luca's wrist, his fingers wrapped around the delicate bones like a promise he hadn't meant to make. "Why did you help me?" Luca asked, pulling his hand away but not stepping back, staying close enough that Marcus could smell his cologne, expensive and complex, cedar and bergamot with an underlying note of danger. Marcus wanted to say it was the story, that he'd recognized the setup for what it was. A frame job so obvious it made his teeth ache. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He'd looked into those dark eyes and seen someone worth saving, worth risking everything for, and that terrified him more than any knife ever could. "I'm a journalist," Marcus said, which wasn't really an answer but was all he could manage with Luca standing so close, with adrenaline still singing through his veins. "I know a frame when I see one, and whoever did this, they wanted you to take the fall." Luca laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor, and ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it charmingly disheveled in a way that made Marcus's heart do something stupid and unwelcome in his chest. "The dead man was Giovanni Rousseau," Luca said, his voice dropping low as if the stones themselves might be listening. He was going to expose corruption in the Venetian Preservation Committee, bribes, fraud, millions of euros being siphoned from restoration projects. Marcus felt the familiar thrill of a real story, the kind that could make or break a career, but it was tangled up with something else now. Something warm and protective and entirely unprofessional. "And you?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer, already seeing the shape of the conspiracy forming like a picture developing in a darkroom. Luca met his eyes with an intensity that felt like touching a live wire, dangerous and electric and impossible to look away from. "I'm the architect who discovered the discrepancies, who threatened to go to the authorities if they didn't stop," Luca said. And Marcus understood then that this beautiful, brave, foolish man had painted a target on his own back. The church bells of San Marco began to toll, marking the hour, and somewhere in the distance, police sirens wailed through the narrow streets. Luca flinched at the sound, his composure cracking just enough for Marcus to see the terror beneath, the understanding that his entire life had just imploded in the space of minutes. "I need to prove my innocence," Luca said. But his voice wavered, and Marcus acted on instinct, reaching out to steady him, his hand finding the curve of Luca's shoulder. "We need to prove your innocence," Marcus corrected, and the word we hung between them like a bridge spanning an impossible distance. Luca looked at him with something Marcus couldn't quite name. Gratitude mixed with confusion, and the beginning of something that felt dangerously like hope. "You don't even know me," Luca whispered. But he didn't pull away from Marcus's touch, and that felt significant somehow. Like the first line of a story Marcus desperately wanted to read. "I know you didn't kill that man," Marcus said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice, by how much he already believed in this stranger's innocence despite every logical reason not to. "And I know that whoever did this is powerful enough to fake a murder scene and frame you convincingly, which means you can't go to the police until we have evidence." Luca nodded slowly, the fear in his eyes giving way to determination, and Marcus felt something shift between them. An unspoken alliance forming in the golden morning light. They spent the next hours in a borrowed apartment above a mask maker's shop, courtesy of Luca's friend who asked no questions but left them coffee and fresh bread. Marcus set up his laptop on the small kitchen table while Luca paced, explaining the preservation committee's structure, the restoration projects where money had gone missing, the meetings where Giovanni had gathered evidence. Watching him talk, animated despite his fear, hands sketching invisible buildings in the air. Marcus found himself distracted by the curve of Luca's neck, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. "You're not listening," Luca said suddenly, catching Marcus staring, and a faint smile played at the corners of his mouth despite everything. Marcus felt heat rise to his face, embarrassed at being caught. But Luca didn't look angry instead. There was something almost fond in his expression, as if Marcus's attention was a gift rather than an intrusion. "I'm listening," Marcus protested weakly, even though they both knew it was a lie. Even though the air between them had suddenly grown thick with awareness. Luca crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps, leaning over Marcus's shoulder to point at something on the laptop screen. And Marcus caught his breath at the proximity. "This project," Luca said, his voice low and close to Marcus's ear, sending shivers down his spine, is where the largest discrepancy occurred. €3 million unaccounted for. Marcus tried to focus on the spreadsheet, on the numbers that danced across the screen. But all he could think about was the warmth of Luca's body, the subtle scent of his cologne, the dangerous want that was building in his chest. "Luca," Marcus said, turning in his chair, finding himself face to face with those dark eyes, close enough to count the flecks of gold hidden in their depths. For a moment, neither of them moved, suspended in that space where possibility hangs like morning mist, where a single choice could change everything. Then Luca stepped back, breaking the spell. And Marcus felt the loss of his warmth like a physical thing. "We should focus," Luca said. But his voice was rough, uncertain, and Marcus knew he wasn't the only one feeling this impossible pull. They worked in silence for a while, the tension between them like a third presence in the room, until Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from his editor asking about his assignment deadline. The real world intruded with its demands and consequences, reminding Marcus that he had a job, a life, responsibilities that didn't include harboring a murder suspect or falling for someone he'd known less than 12 hours. But when he looked up and found Luca watching him with those careful, hopeful eyes, Marcus knew it was already too late for caution. "I found something," he said, pulling up security footage he'd hacked from the hotel's server, his years of investigative work making quick work of their outdated firewall. The timestamp showed someone entering Giovanni's room 30 minutes before the estimated time of death. Someone who moved with purpose and familiarity through the corridors. Luca leaned in close again. And this time Marcus didn't pretend the proximity was merely practical. "That's Alessandro Ricci," Luca breathed, his shoulder pressed against Marcus's, their faces inches apart as they stared at the screen. "He's the committee chairman, the one who had the most to lose if Giovanni exposed everything." Marcus felt Luca's excitement vibrate through the point where their bodies touched. Felt his own pulse quicken in response to the breakthrough and to something else entirely. "We need to get this to someone we can trust," Marcus said, downloading the footage to multiple drives, already thinking through his contacts in European media. People who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Luca nodded, but when Marcus looked at him, he saw the weight of reality settling back onto those elegant shoulders. Saw the understanding that proving his innocence might not be enough to protect him from whoever was powerful enough to orchestrate this. "They'll come after you too now," Luca said quietly, and there was something devastating in his voice. A guilt that made Marcus want to pull him close and promise that everything would be okay. "You should have just called the police, should have let them arrest me, should have stayed safe, instead of the fear Marcus expected to feel, instead of regret or second thoughts." He felt only a fierce protectiveness and a certainty that surprised him with its intensity. "I'm exactly where I want to be," Marcus said, and meant it, even though it was crazy, even though he barely knew this man, even though every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to walk away. Luca's eyes widened slightly, searching Marcus's face for the lie, for the inevitable moment when self-preservation would win out over whatever this was between them. But Marcus held his gaze, letting him see the truth. Letting him see that in less than a day, something fundamental had shifted in Marcus's universe. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Luca said. But he was smiling now, a real smile that transformed his face from beautiful to absolutely breathtaking. Marcus laughed, surprising himself, because somehow in the middle of a murder investigation and a corruption scandal, he felt lighter than he had in years. "Probably both," he admitted, and on impulse. He reached out and caught Luca's hand, threading their fingers together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Luca looked down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable, and for a moment Marcus thought he'd made a terrible mistake. Had read the situation entirely wrong. Then Luca's fingers tightened around his. A grip that felt like an anchor and a promise and the beginning of something that terrified Marcus in the best possible way. "Marcus?" Luca said, his voice barely above a whisper. And Marcus loved the way his name sounded in that accented voice. Loved it so much it hurt, before either of them could say anything else. Before Marcus could examine too closely why he was willing to throw away everything for someone he'd just met, a knock at the door froze them both. Luca's friend called out in rapid Italian, her voice urgent and afraid, and when Luca answered, her words tumbled out in a torrent that Marcus couldn't follow. But he didn't need to understand the language to recognize warning in her tone. Didn't need translation to know that danger had found them faster than expected. "The police are searching for me," Luca said, his face pale, "and they're questioning everyone I know, offering rewards for information." He looked at Marcus with something that might have been an apology or a plea. And Marcus made a decision that would either save them both or destroy everything. "Then we run," he said simply, already packing up his laptop, already planning their next move. Because giving up had never been an option, not really. Not from the moment he'd looked into those dark eyes and chosen to believe. They left through the back entrance, slipping into the Venice afternoon crowds like ghosts, and Marcus kept Luca's hand firmly in his, unwilling to lose him in the press of tourists and locals. The sun was high now, painting the canals in shades of blue and green, and under different circumstances, Marcus would have found the city magical, romantic, everything the guidebooks promised. But now every corner held potential danger. Every face could belong to someone looking for Luca, and the beauty of Venice felt like a cage closing in around them. "Where are we going?" Luca asked, trusting Marcus's lead, even though he was the one who knew the city. And that trust felt like a weight and a gift Marcus wasn't sure he deserved. "The train station," Marcus said, pulling up tickets on his phone. Booking passage to Rome under a false name, using skills from years of investigative work that had always felt morally gray until now. "We need to get out of Venice, need to put distance between us and whoever's pulling the strings." The train station was chaos. Perfect cover for two men trying to disappear. And they boarded the Rome Express with minutes to spare. Only when they collapsed into their private compartment, door locked and curtains drawn, did Marcus let himself breathe. Luca sat across from him, his elegant suit rumpled now, his careful composure finally cracking. And Marcus watched as the reality of his situation hit him all at once. He was a fugitive. His career was over. His life as he knew it had ended in a hotel lobby at 3 a.m. "Hey," Marcus said softly, crossing the small space to sit beside Luca on the narrow bench, their thighs pressing together in the cramped quarters. "We're going to figure this out, I promise." Luca laughed, but it came out broken, and when he turned to look at Marcus, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You can't promise that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You can't know that everything will be okay." Marcus knew Luca was right. Knew he was making promises he had no business making. Knew that logic and reason dictated 1,000 better choices than the ones he was making. But when Luca's composure finally shattered, when the first tear escaped and tracked down his cheek, Marcus didn't think at all. He just pulled Luca into his arms, holding him while the train carried them away from Venice and into an uncertain future. Luca collapsed against him, his face pressed into Marcus's shoulder, his body shaking with silent sobs. And Marcus held him tighter, one hand in his hair, murmuring nonsense reassurances that felt true anyway. "I don't understand why you're doing this," Luca said eventually, his voice muffled against Marcus's shirt. But he didn't pull away, didn't put distance between them. Marcus ran his fingers through Luca's dark hair, feeling the silk of it, feeling the trust implicit in how completely Luca had let his guard down. "Neither do I," Marcus admitted honestly, because he'd never believed in love at first sight, had always rolled his eyes at the idea of fate or destiny or cosmic connection, but this felt different. Felt like recognition rather than infatuation. Like his soul had been waiting for Luca even though his mind hadn't known it. "All I know is that when I saw you in that lobby, something just clicked into place," Marcus continued, tilting Luca's face up with gentle fingers, needing to see his eyes. "Like I'd been looking for you without realizing it. And suddenly, there you were." Luca's breath caught, his lips parting slightly, and Marcus was acutely aware of how close they were, of how easy it would be to close the distance. "Marcus," Luca whispered. And it wasn't a question or a protest, just his name said like a prayer or a promise. Marcus leaned in slowly, giving Luca every chance to pull away, to say no, to choose safety over this dangerous want. But Luca didn't move, just watched Marcus approach with those dark eyes that held whole universes. And when their lips finally met, it felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff all at once. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, to strangers learning the shape of each other's mouths. The taste of coffee and fear and something sweet underneath. Then Luca made a small sound in the back of his throat and deepened the kiss, one hand fisting in Marcus's shirt, pulling him closer like he was afraid Marcus might disappear if he let go. Marcus kissed him back with everything he had, with all the words he didn't know how to say, with the promise that he wasn't going anywhere, that whatever came next, they'd face it together when they finally broke apart. Both breathing hard, Luca rested his forehead against Marcus's, his eyes still closed. "This is crazy," he said, but he was smiling, and Marcus felt his heart do that stupid fluttering thing again. "Completely insane," Marcus agreed, pressing another quick kiss to Luca's lips because now that he'd started, stopping felt impossible. "Running from the police with the man I met this morning, probably throwing away my career. Definitely making enemies of some very powerful people." "You could still walk away," Luca said. But his hands were still twisted in Marcus's shirt, contradicting his words. Marcus pulled back enough to look Luca in the eyes, to make sure he understood what Marcus was saying. "I'm not walking away," he said firmly, his hands cupping Luca's face, thumbs brushing along sharp cheekbones. "Not now, not ever, so you're stuck with me." Luca's answering smile was incandescent, transforming his whole face, and Marcus kissed him again because he couldn't not. Because Luca was beautiful and brave and his, at least for now. They stayed like that as the train rolled through the Italian countryside, wrapped around each other in the small compartment, stealing kisses between whispered plans and shared fears. Marcus had never felt more alive, more certain of a choice, more ready to face whatever consequences came from choosing his heart over his head. By the time they reached Rome, they had a plan. Contact Marcus's editor at the International Tribune. Someone Marcus trusted implicitly, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. They'd give her the evidence, the security footage, the financial records, everything they'd gathered in their too brief investigation. Then they'd go to ground until the story broke, until public pressure made it impossible for the corruption to continue, until Luca was safe. But first, they needed to survive long enough to execute the plan. And as they exited the train into Rome's Termini station, Marcus spotted trouble. Two men in suits, standing too still among the chaos of travelers, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional intensity. "Don't look," Marcus murmured, steering Luca toward the opposite exit, his hand finding the small of Luca's back, both protective and possessive. "We've got company." Luca tensed but kept walking, trusting Marcus's lead, and they slipped into the Rome evening crowds like water. Behind them, Marcus heard shouting, the sound of pursuit, and his heart kicked into overdrive. They ran through narrow streets, past glowing trattorias and ancient ruins, the beauty of the eternal city blurring around them as they focused only on escape. Luca's hand found his, their fingers lacing together. And Marcus held on like Luca was the only solid thing in a tilting world. They ducked into a small church. The sudden cool darkness a shock after the warm evening air, and pressed themselves into a shadowed alcove behind a statue of some Saint Marcus didn't recognize. Their pursuers thundered past outside, voices raised in anger and frustration, and Marcus held his breath, held Luca, feeling the rapid beats of both their hearts pressed together, in the dim light filtering through stained glass. Luca's eyes were huge, terrified, and Marcus kissed him again because he needed to, because comfort was the only thing he could offer. "I'm sorry," Luca whispered when they broke apart, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for dragging you into this nightmare." Marcus shook his head, his hands framing Luca's face, forcing him to meet his eyes in the shadows. "Stop apologizing for being the best thing that's ever happened to me," he said fiercely, meaning every word even though it was crazy. Even though they'd known each other less than 24 hours. Luca stared at him like he'd never seen anything quite like Marcus before, like he couldn't believe Marcus was real. "How can you say that?" he asked, genuinely confused, gesturing vaguely at their situation, at the danger pressing in from all sides. "We're running for our lives, everything is falling apart." "You barely know me," Marcus smiled despite everything. Despite the fear and the danger and the impossible odds they faced. "I know you're brave enough to stand up to corruption even when it puts you at risk," Marcus said, counting out Luca's qualities on his fingers like he was presenting evidence. "I know you're talented enough that your work threatened powerful people. I know you kiss like you're trying to memorize me, like I'm something precious." Luca made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and Marcus kept going, needing Luca to understand. "And I know that in one day, you've made me feel more alive, more certain of anything, than I have in my entire life." "You're insane," Luca said. But he was kissing Marcus again, deep and desperate, like he was trying to pour all his fear and hope and trust into the connection between their lips. Marcus kissed him back with equal fervor, tasting tears, though he wasn't sure whose end, the sweet urgency of maybe running out of time. When they finally broke apart, both panting, Luca rested his forehead against Marcus's shoulder. "I'm falling for you," he whispered so quietly Marcus almost missed it. "And it terrifies me, because I could lose you. Because you could get hurt because of me." Marcus's heart clenched at the confession, at the fear beneath Luca's words, and he tilted Luca's face up with gentle insistence. "Then we don't lose," he said simply, with more confidence than he felt but absolute determination burning in his chest. "We're smarter than they are, faster than they are. And we have something they don't, we have the truth." Luca searched his face in the dim light, then nodded slowly, some of his fear giving way to resolve. They waited in the church until full darkness fell, then made their way carefully through Rome's streets to an internet cafe Marcus knew from a previous assignment. The owner was an old contact who asked no questions when Marcus paid in cash for private booth time and didn't log their session. Marcus pulled up his encrypted email and sent everything to his editor: the security footage, the financial documents, a detailed account of events, and coordinates for where to find Giovanni Russo's real killer. "It's done," Marcus said, closing the laptop with a finality that felt momentous, knowing that once his editor opened that email, there would be no going back, no undoing what they'd set in motion. Luca stood behind him, his hand on Marcus's shoulder, steady and grounding, and when Marcus looked up at him, he saw the same understanding reflected in those dark eyes. "What happens now?" Luca asked, and there was vulnerability in the question, a need for reassurance that Marcus desperately wanted to provide. "Now we wait," Marcus said, standing and pulling Luca close, needing the contact, needing to feel Luca solid and real in his arms. "The story will break tomorrow morning, maybe sooner if my editor works through the night. Once it's public, once people know the truth, it becomes much harder for them to silence us." Luca nodded against Marcus's shoulder, his arms wrapped tight around Marcus's waist, and they stood like that in the dingy internet cafe, holding each other like anchors in a storm. They found a small hotel in Trastevere, paid cash for a room, and climbed the narrow stairs to the third floor in exhausted silence. The room was tiny, barely space for the double bed and a small bathroom, but it had a window overlooking a quiet courtyard and a door that locked. Marcus checked the locks twice, wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, then turned to find Luca standing in the middle of the room looking lost and overwhelmed. "Hey," Marcus said softly, crossing to him, unable to bear the distance of even a few feet. Luca looked up at him with eyes that held too much exhaustion and fear and something that looked dangerously like love. "I don't know how to do this," Luca admitted, his voice small in the quiet room. "I don't know how to wait, how to hope, how to believe everything will be okay." Marcus pulled him close, one hand cradling the back of Luca's head, the other wrapped around his waist. "Then let me hope for both of us," Marcus murmured into Luca's hair, breathing in the scent that was becoming familiar, becoming home. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, until Marcus felt some of the tension drain from Luca's body. "I need a shower," Luca said eventually, practical even now. "I need to wash today off." Marcus nodded, reluctantly letting him go. Watching as Luca gathered his small bag and disappeared into the bathroom, while water ran and steam began to seep under the bathroom door. Marcus checked his phone for the 20th time, waiting for confirmation from his editor, for some sign that the wheels were in motion. Nothing yet, just the late evening hour glowing on the screen and a low battery warning. He plugged it in, set alerts for emails, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. All the dangers still lurking just outside their fragile sanctuary. When Luca emerged from the bathroom, hair damp and skin flushed from hot water, wearing only a towel around his waist, Marcus forgot how to breathe. Luca was beautiful in daylight, devastating in the soft lamplight of the hotel room, and Marcus wanted him with an intensity that made his hands shake. "Your turn," Luca said, his voice rough. And Marcus recognized the same want reflected in those dark eyes, the same need that was pulling them together like gravity. Marcus showered quickly, the hot water sluicing away the tension of the day. And when he emerged in his own towel, he found Luca sitting on the edge of the bed, still beautifully disheveled, and watching Marcus with an expression that made his pulse race. "Come here," Luca said, not a command, but an invitation. And Marcus crossed the small room in 3 steps. Drawn to Luca like a compass to north, they came together in a kiss that felt inevitable. Like the conclusion to an argument they'd been having since the moment they met. Luca's hands were in Marcus's wet hair, pulling him down, and Marcus braced himself on either side of Luca's body, caging him in, protecting him even now. "Tell me to stop," Marcus murmured against Luca's lips, giving him every out. "Tell me if this is too fast, too much." Too soon Luca pulled back, just enough to look into Marcus's eyes, his own blazing with certainty. "Don't you dare stop," Luca said. And then he was pulling Marcus down onto the bed, their towels getting lost somewhere in the tangle of limbs and desire. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with reverent touches and whispered encouragement. And Marcus tried to memorize every sound Luca made, every expression that crossed his beautiful face. It felt like more than physical release, it felt like a promise, like a claim, like 2 people choosing each other against all logic and reason. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Luca's head on Marcus's chest, Marcus's fingers tracing idle patterns on Luca's bare shoulder. "I love you," Luca said into the darkness, his voice soft but clear, no hesitation or doubt. Marcus's breath caught because it was too soon, too fast, too impossible, but it was also the truest thing he'd ever heard. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to Luca's hair, marveling at how something so huge could feel so simple, so right. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for a few hours, the world outside their locked door didn't exist. But Marcus woke to the insistent buzzing of his phone at dawn, Luca stirring against him, and when he checked the screen, his editor's message made his heart leap. "Story goes live in 1 hour. You were right about everything." "Stay safe, Luca," Marcus said, gently shaking him awake. Unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "It's happening. The story's breaking." Luca came awake instantly, his eyes wide, and Marcus showed him the message. Watched hope bloom across his face like sunrise. They dressed quickly, turned on the small television in the room, and waited as the hour ticked down, Marcus's arm around Luca's shoulders, Luca's hand gripping Marcus's knee. When the news broke, it broke everywhere at once. The Tribune's story, picked up by Italian media, international outlets, social media exploding with outrage and demands for justice. The security footage of Alessandro Ricci entering Giovanni's room, the financial documents showing millions in embezzled funds, the whole corrupt system exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. Marcus watched Luca's face as the news anchors declared him innocent, as they showed his architectural work, as they painted him as a hero who'd stood up to corruption. "It's over," Luca breathed, tears streaming down his face. And Marcus pulled him close, his own eyes burning. "You're safe now," Marcus murmured into Luca's hair, feeling the tension he'd been carrying for days finally release. "We're safe." They held each other while the news cycled through the story again and again, while the phone began ringing with calls from police wanting Luca's statement, from prosecutors building their case, from media wanting interviews. A week later, they stood together in a Venice courtroom while Alessandro Ricci and 3 others were formally charged with murder, corruption, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. Luca gave his testimony with quiet dignity, Marcus sitting in the gallery, silently supporting him through every difficult moment. When it was over, when they walked out of the courthouse into the Venice sunshine, reporters swarmed them with questions, but Marcus just took Luca's hand and led him away, through the crowds and into the quiet streets they'd fled through just days before. "What now?" Luca asked as they walked along a canal, no longer running, no longer afraid, just 2 men in love, navigating a future that suddenly stretched bright and open before them. Marcus stopped, turned Luca to face him, cupped his face in both hands. "Now we live," he said simply. "We take our time, we do this right. We build something real." Luca smiled, that devastating smile that had captured Marcus's heart from the very beginning. "I'd like that," Luca said, rising on his toes to kiss Marcus softly, sweetly, a kiss full of promise and possibility. Around them, Venice continued its ancient dance. Tourists and locals moving through the streets, unaware that in their midst, 2 people had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and decided to choose love anyway. "I'd like that very much." Marcus kissed him again because he could, because they had time now, because the danger had passed and what remained was just them and the life they would build together. "I love you," he said, meaning it more with every passing moment, certain now that what had felt like madness was actually the sanest choice he'd ever made. Luca's answering smile was everything. His whispered "I love you" to a benediction. They walked through Venice hand in hand, talking about the future, about Marcus's next assignment, about Luca's architectural projects, about whether Rome or Venice or somewhere entirely new would be home. The details didn't matter really, not when they had each other, not when they'd survived the impossible and come out the other side intact. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and that, Marcus thought as Luca laughed at something a passing gondolier said, as the sunlight caught in his dark hair and made him glow like something precious and perfect, was more than enough. It was everything.